All right, so today is day 54 on the CDT, and it was a good day. Um, I think what we'll do today is just briefly touch on the trail, and then I got a little bit of reception when I got onto one of the high points today, and somebody asked a question, so I think I can answer that question today instead of talking about trail stuff, because the trail stuff was pretty mundane. I hiked about 22 miles, I believe, today, and the first 4 miles was getting off of the ascent towards, or the trail that goes towards the ascent towards San Luis Peak, and I hit the trailhead pretty early, and then after that, we're now crossing between the San Juan range and the Saltwash range. So I think I may have mentioned a day or two ago, there's a big flattish open space. I say flattish because there's still some ascent, but it's a lower elevation and it's a little bit more gradual than when you're going over saddles of 12,000 feet or high points at 13,000 feet. So I want to say we dipped down to like 9,500, and then we went back up and we're hovering between 10 and 11, but I'd have to double check that. It was a pretty straightforward day hiking wise. We are like between these two mountain ranges, there is a concern of water, so you just have to pay attention to water. It was nice in the San Juans not to have to worry about water, because if you missed one water source, one was going to come up in a minute or so, or half mile, or whatever it is. So you just have to pay attention to water. But it's interesting hiking this section in reverse. I hiked it in 2009 on the Colorado Trail, and I was going southbound. So I was looking at things from the perspective of going towards the San Juans. Coming from the San Juans, I would say that this section's not as flat as I remember it, and I think the reason for that is, and this is just perception, it's not based on me looking at maps or anything, but it seems like when you're going southbound, the inclines are gradual, and then you have some declines that are pretty quick. Coming the other way, those pretty quick declines now become pretty, I don't want to say pretty steep, but they're steeper inclines than what I remember going southbound. So when I said that we could fly across this section because it's pretty flat, that was from the perspective of southbound, and now coming northbound, it's like, there may have been a little bit more elevation than I remember. But it's nothing like hiking up to the high mountains. So that's it, I think, for the trail. Tomorrow is more flat. Today's hike was 22 miles. I stopped a little bit early because of all the rain yesterday. I wanted to open up my tent and open up my pack and get stuff set up and let it sit in the sun for a while and finish drying out. So I think tomorrow I should be able to, I mean, depending on water, like if a water source is at 24 miles, then I'll probably stop, but I think I can probably do about 25 miles or so tomorrow, and hopefully it's a relatively, flattish day. So the question that came in today was actually about Beau. Those of you who know me pretty well know that I don't need any reason to talk about Beau. I miss him a lot, and I love that guy. However, the question came in about Beau hiking the Colorado Trail with me, and that's how I got one of my first trail names. And they asked, like, what were Beau's exploits, or what else did he do with me with regard to outdoor activity. So Beau was an Australian cattle dog. There's two types of Australian cattle dogs, either a blue heeler or a red heeler, and that's just based on their coats, their fur color. Beau was a blue heeler, so his coat was blue merle, and Beau was rescued about a year into his life by a friend of mine, and I met Beau when he was 2. He lived with my friend from the time of 1 until he was 6, and then when he was 6, he came to live with me permanently. My friend used to point out the fact that I used to come and steal Beau and hike with Beau, and I actually hiked more with Beau than I did with her, which guilty as charged I did. When she had to let Beau go, it was just a natural fit for me because of my active lifestyle. And Beau was 100% blue heeler. When you have an Australian cattle dog and you put like a mix beside 100% heeler, you can notice a difference. The mixes a lot of times will have on and off buttons, meaning that if you go out and hike for 10 miles or whatever, the dog will come home and sleep if it's a mix. If it's 100% heeler, I want to back up. If it's a mix, but most of the mix is heeler, you may not have an off button, but a lot of the mixes I've met have an off button. If it's 100% heeler like Beau was, we would go hike a 14er, so 14,000 foot mountain, and I would drive the 2.5 or whatever hours home from the hike, and we would get home and Beau would go and pick up his ball and want to go play fetch. And I would look at him and say, hey buddy, not all of us got to take, a couple hour nap in the car. And so some people would say, well, he has an off button because he took a couple hour nap in the car. I promise you that if we got finished with the 14er and I had pulled a ball out of the car, he would have been ready to play fetch immediately. So that's what I mean by an on and off button. Beau could sleep in. He could have a chill day, but I remember distinctly many times working from home when after 2 or 3 hours of me working on the computer, Beau would come over and climb up in my lap, like the front part of him in my lap, to say like, hey, it's time for a break. And so, he could chill for a couple of hours, but if that guy didn't get daily exercise, then he could turn what most people would describe as destructive. But with healers, it's more of engagement. They're extremely intelligent, and if they haven't been exercised, then they'll start trying to figure out puzzles. And to give you one example of a puzzle, man, my hair looks great when it's clean. It's only 2 days out. I once... Having to dog-proof your house is totally different with the healer, and I slowly had to learn that. And so I baked some king-size pumpkin muffins, like king-size meaning like, they're in the palm of your hand, they're like really tall. For those few of you who are watching these videos that did the Colorado Relay with us, that 24-hour race, like I brought the muffins that I called like calorie bombs. That's what I'm talking about. It was like the huge muffins. And I baked a half a dozen of these huge muffins. I ate one of them, and the other 5 I put into a piece of Tupperware. And the Tupperware was extremely difficult to open. Like I needed 2 hands and like leverage to open this thing. And I set it on the counter. And this is what I mean by like blue heeler or ACD, like Australian cattle dog, proofing your house. I can't remember what happened. I went out into the yard, or I can't remember if I ran an errand, but I was only gone for about 5 minutes. And in that 5 minutes, Beau had gotten up on the counter because they can jump very high. So he got up on the counter, pulled the Tupperware down, wrestled the Tupperware lid open, ate the 5 pumpkin muffins. And so that's the type of behavior that some people consider destructive, but again, they just need to be engaged. And if they're not getting daily exercise, then they're not engaged. And the exercise has to be hard exercise. Like it has to be an hour of chasing a ball, or an hour of swimming, or whatever it is. And that hour usually has to be multiplied by 2 or 3, depending on what type of season it is and how much exercise they've gotten recently. So if Beau hiked a 14er the day before, I might get away with playing fetch with him for about an hour once the next day, and he would be okay. If we hadn't had any hard exercise and I was just playing fetch with him for like 3 days straight, he would need to play fetch 2 to 3 times a day. It didn't matter if there was a snowstorm outside, if it was -5 degrees outside, they need exercise. And if they don't get it, then that's when they're quote unquote destructive. They're just really intelligent, and they want to figure things out. And that was one of the great things about Beau. His intelligence was wonderful. His high energy and his athleticism was wonderful. Everything about it just fit my lifestyle. And so he came to live with me from the time he was 6 until he passed away at 17 and a half years old. And that's another thing about healers. They live long lives. I believe the record for the longest dog is 29 years, and I believe it's a blue heeler in Australia. I don't know if that's been usurped by other dogs, but I know a few years ago that was accurate, that the oldest dog was a blue heeler. And I'm pretty sure it was 29 years old. So Beau had a nice long life. He did get to hike half the Colorado Trail with me, so that's about 250-ish miles. He got to hike the first half, and he actually cut open his paw, and he never liked to wear boots. And so I couldn't get him to wear his boots so I could get the cut to close. And so he had to step off at halfway point and hang with some friends of mine for a couple weeks while I finished the trail. However, Beau got to do many, many other things. He hiked, let's see. So he hiked the Maroon Bells Loop, or the 4-pass loop, out in Aspen, or outside of Aspen. He summited, I'm going off the top of my head, but I believe he summited 25 unique 14ers. And then if you include the repeats, I think he had 35 summits of 14ers. He also summited about a dozen 13ers, like high 13ers, like 13,800 and above. He loves snow. I always said that if you gave that guy a untouched field of snow and let him run wild, then he would probably run himself to death, because he loved running in snow. He liked to swim if he was chasing the ball, like if you'd throw the ball in the water. His job was the ball. Like, healers need a job, and so as soon as you identify that job, it makes life a heck of a lot easier, because you know, like, hey, this is his job. And so I would say that Beau had 2 jobs. One was hiking the 14ers, and the other was the ball. So that was good for us that we found that. Beau's first 14er was Grays and Tories through Chihuahua Gulch, and his last 14er was Mount Antero. And if I remember correctly, he was 14 years old when he hiked Mount Antero. Healers keep their energy until the end of their lives. So even though Beau couldn't hike 14ers after the age of 14, he did do other hikes, like lower elevation hikes and shorter hikes. And for example, we used to hike to the Squaw Mountain, or the Squaw Fire Lookout on Squaw Mountain outside of Idaho Springs. He loved that hike. It was a pretty short hike. I want to say it was like 5 or 6 miles round trip, and a lot of times it had snow on it, so he could play in the snow, and he knew exactly where he was going, because we did that hike probably a couple dozen times. It was a good warm-up hike for the spring. He still loved to swim. That guy swam until he had his seizure. He did have a seizure about 18 months before he passed, and he was on meds. He also lost his eyesight and his hearing in the last 18 to 24 months. And so he swam until he was about 16, and then we had to stop, but we continued to go for walks. And I promise you, until about, it was 3 weeks or 4 weeks before he passed, that guy, we would go for a walk, and his hips were bad. He was on preventive maintenance for like the inflammation in his hips. He was blind, he was deaf, but we would be walking in the park, and that guy would just suddenly bust out into a run, and he'd run for a quarter mile, and you could see in his face that he loved the wind on his face. And like I said, he did that until about 3 or 4 weeks before he passed. So the guy was nearly 17 and a half, and he's still busting out into runs during his walks. So we covered the 14ers and the 13ers. We covered the Maroon Bells Loop and the Colorado Trail. I mean, he did many other miscellaneous hikes. So whether it was a weekend hike or, multi-day hike on the Colorado Trail, just like, again, 3 days on it, not the entire thing, or some other trail that we found, like he would 100% come out with me on those. And yeah, I mean, that kid hiked a lot. He got to see a lot of Colorado, and like I said, I miss him. He was my hiking buddy, but he led an active lifestyle. So that's a little bit about Beau. I think one of my favorite stories was the first night that it's a much longer story. Like his first year of his life was not good, and that's a much longer story. Him coming to live with me is a much longer story, but essentially the first night that he came to live with me and I brought all of his stuff like in the house with me, I got the sense that he understood, like, okay, I'm living here now. Like this is where I live now. And it was not even 3 minutes that he was in the house. I'm walking around looking for him, and the kid had jumped up on my bed. With his mouth, he had pulled the covers over him into like a little burrito, and the only thing sticking out was his head. And I came walking in, and he was, on the bed as happy as could be, passed out, ready to, sleep. And he had made himself into a little burrito to to sleep on the bed. So like the personality of this kid and the intelligence of this kid was impressive. He had many nicknames, and he responded to all of them. But one of the best things about Beau was he went by Beau, usually B-E-A-U. His full name was Beauregard. And just like if he was a kid, if I said Beau and he was doing something he knew he wasn't supposed to, and I said Beau again with a more stern voice, and he still ignored me, and then I said Beauregard in that stern voice, he would stop whatever he was doing because he knew that he's about to get into trouble. So it's sort of like having a kid and you use the first and the middle name with the child, and the child's like, oh, I'm in trouble now. If I use that full Beauregard name on him in a stern voice, he knew, okay, I better stop this or I'm going to be in trouble. So the personality on that kid was amazing. His other nicknames, I think I may have mentioned him in the previous video, but he was called Fuzzy Face, Fuzzy Butt, Buddy, Monkey, Rigardo, Smelly Butt. That guy could clear a room. Forgetting some of them now, but he was a great companion. So I know this video is a little bit longer, but again, as I said, I don't need a reason to talk about Beau. But those are his exploits, and a little bit extra, more than his exploits. He definitely is missed. He passed away October of 2020, and he was born around April of 2003. So he made it about 17 and a half years, and we tried to make the most of it. So that's Beau. If anybody has any questions, or if I left something out, then certainly let me know. And I hope everyone's having a great evening. Today's shout out is to my buddy Beau. He's hiked with me a couple times. I felt his presence a couple times on the trail. I think it was like day 4 was the first time, but he's been with me a few times. And I'm actually carrying a piece of his collar with me on the trail, so that he's with me all the time. So shout out to Beau. I hope everyone's well. Have a nice evening, and I'll talk to you folks tomorrow.